Welcome to News 9. You are watching On Point with me. In this edition, we have two on points for you. Bengaluru techie Atul Subhash tragic suicide sparks debate on dowry laws. Are the anti-dowry laws being misused? Telugu actor Mohan Babu assaults TV9 journalist, grievously injures him. But first, headlines. Prime Minister Modi meets Raj Kapoor's family, honors his life and legacy ahead of his birth centenary.
अभी हाल ही में आप आई थिंक अफ्रीका गए थे और वहाँ भी मैंने एक क्लिप देखा था, आप एक जवान के साथ खड़े थे और वो उस टाइम मेरा गाना गा रहे थे समझा, बट मैंने वो क्लिप देखा था और काफ़ी लोगों ने मुझे भेजा था, सब लोग बहुत खुश हो गए. बट एक चीज़ मैं कहना चाहूँगी, इस गाना जो है जो दुनिया को यूनाइट करता है, स्पेशली जो हिंदी गाने होते हैं, मतलब लोग गाते ही रहते हैं, शायद शब्द उनको समझ में ना आए. और ये मैंने काफ़ी देखा जब हम ट्रैवल करते हैं, खास करके ऑफकोर्स विद राज कपूर सॉन्ग्स. बट इवन नाउ आई थिंक एक जो एक स्पेशल फीलिंग और सेंटिमेंट होता है हमारे गानों में, सब लोग और इंस्टेंटली कनेक्ट करते हैं. और उसी के साथ एक क्वेश्चन था आपके लिए, क्या आप गाने सुन पाते हैं?
मैं सुन पाता हूँ क्योंकि मुझे अच्छा लगता है. कभी मौका मिल जाए तो मैं जरूर सुन लेता हूँ.
Mallikarjun Kharge's big charge on Jagdeep Dhankar says Rajya Sabha chairman acts like a school headmaster, functions as government spokesperson. BJP sharpens attack on Congress, says Nehru Gandhi family ties with George Soros run deep. India bloc MP seek to impeach Allahabad High Court judge over controversial remark on UCC at VHP event. Rahul Gandhi needs Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla, asked him to expunge derogatory remarks against him. Mamata Banerjee's first reaction on India leaders backing her to lead the alliance, says she is grateful to all the leaders who have honoured her. Protesters storm collector's office in Parbhani after a replica of the Indian constitution held by statue of Baba Saheb Ambedkar is vandalized. Khalil Haqqani, brother of Jalaluddin Haqqani, founder of the Haqqani network, killed in Kabul blast. An intense cold wave snowfall hit J&K, Himachal Pradesh, Lahul Spiti, coldest at minus 12.7 degrees Celsius. The tragic suicide of Bengaluru techie Atul Subhash has reignited the debate over anti-dowry law and its misuse. In his final message, Subhash expressed distress over false accusations made against him by his wife and harassment faced by him from the legal system. His case has sparked a debate on the balance of protection for women and its misuse by vested parties against men. First, let's take a look at what the anti-dowry law is, what are its provisions, and what makes the law tough. Dowry Prohibit Act was enacted on May 1st, 1961 to prevent giving or receiving dowry. Second, it defines dowry as property or security exchanged directly or indirectly in marriage. Third, amended in 1984 to regulate wedding presents with mandatory documentation. Fourth, includes dowry-related cruelty, dowry death, and abetment of suicide. Fifth, giving, taking, or demanding dowry is punishable. Sixth, negotiations for a reduced dowry or post-marriage demands are also punishable. Now, dowry punishment. Taking dowry, minimum 5 years imprisonment and fine up to 15,000. Demanding dowry, 6 months to 2 years of imprisonment and fine up to 10,000. Dowry death, punishment from 7 years to life imprisonment. Fourth, in 2005, Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act added legal safeguards. It punishes people. So 2005 Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act adds legal safeguards. So what does it do? It punishes cruelty by husband and relatives, then defines domestic violence to include physical violence, emotional violence, sexual violence, verbal and economic abuse. Eighth, provides women the right to reside in the shared household regardless of the legal ownership. Ninth, enables women to claim financial compensation for the injuries suffered. Now the issue is, what makes it tough? 1. Non-bailable, leading to immediate arrest without inquiry. Second, presumes guilt in dowry death within 7 years of marriage, severe penalties. 3. It shifts burden of proof to the accused in dowry death cases. Fourth, non-bailable offence. Now we look at the other side of the picture, the arguments in favor of anti-dowry law. It eradicates a social evil, promotes women's rights in marriage. Third, it strengthens legal protection for women. Fourth, it's a cultural change in the Indian context. Now, what are the apprehensions about anti-dowry law? False allegation, harassment of innocent, that's the second part. Third, extortion. Fourth, non-bailable nature. Fifth, very important, I would say, apart from that, damage to reputation. The fourth point, damage to reputation. Now, what has Supreme Court said on dowry? Court must exercise caution in dowry harassment cases. Number 2, prevent misuse of law, avoid unnecessary trouble for family. Number 3, tool for unleashing personal vendetta against husband and kin, not done. Fourth, automatic arrest based on mere allegations, not justified. Supreme Court has said this. So, law should not be a tool for blackmail or settling disputes. The court is saying this. Next point. Sweeping claims without evidence cannot justify criminal prosecution. The seventh one, unsubstantiated accusation should be nipped in the bud. Eighth, exercise caution to prevent misuse of legal provision. So very clear, very, very clear. So now let me introduce my guests. I am joined by Deepika Narayan Bharadwaj, men's rights activist, journalist. I am also joined by Rekha Agarwal, women's rights activist, advocate, Supreme Court of India. I am joined by Brijesh Pandey, input editor of News 9, and Ajit Kejha, senior journalist, psephologist. So let me now take you to the facts and then I will start the conversation. These are facts. People should also know the facts. I have given position, what the Honorable Court has said. Fact number 1, dowry death in India in 22-23, 6,450 cases. Fact 2, dowry cases in India 22-23, 13,479. Fact 3, 4.5% decline in dowry death cases from 21 to 22. Now, I will come to the big question. Question number 1, is dowry law effective? Question number 2, has it saved lives? Question number 3, is it misused by women? Question number 4, should it be revisited? Now, this makes the premise of our conversation. And these 4 points, the 4 questions I have raised will be the perimeter for the discussion, and let me straight away go to Deepika Narayan Bharadwaj. So the first question I would like to ask you is dowry law, Deepika, effective? And we'll take all of them one by one in a round. To you first.
Karthikeya, I'm coming from very personal experience of the cases that I handle. I think dowry law has been effectively reduced to kind of a joke of a law in its current scenario. Let me first tell you that the initial laws that you shared, there are actually a lot of different provisions. There is Dowry Prohibition Act 1961. There is 498 of Indian Penal Code, which is now 8586 Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Then there is Domestic Violence Act, Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act 2005. Now, all of these cases, and dowry death is altogether a different provision, which is IPC 304B. I don't know what is the section now in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, but that's a case in which a woman dies an unnatural death and the complaint is made that she was being harassed for dowry. The law that we are talking about, or that was applied in Atul Subhash's case, was essentially 498A of Indian Penal Code, which has been slammed time and again by the high courts and the Supreme Court of India. And all of these cautions that you were sharing have essentially come in the pretext of misuse of IPC 498A.
Okay. So you are saying
Now,
that, okay, no, let's go point by point. Deepika, let's go point by point. So essentially, Deepika, please, there are other people. Essentially, you are saying that it's hard and it gets misused. Let me go across to Rekha Agarwal. Madam, the issue is, has it done well for the Indian women or has it not done well for the Indian women?
I'll answer the question both in yes and no. There was a time when this law was made for the first time, section 498A. There was a reason for making this law. When there were a large number of cases where women were actually undergoing what are called dowry deaths. The term dowry deaths came into existence only because at some point of time, there were a number of women who would just die because a cylinder would burst or a kerosene stove would burst, and it would be passed off as an accident. But whereas the truth was that these women were actually murdered or harassed and suffered so much of cruelty at the hands of their husbands and in-laws, that a number of women, especially in the early years of their marriage, were facing this kind of a mental and physical cruelty at the hands of their husbands and in-laws. And ultimately, section 498A, a special section was incorporated in the Indian Penal Code to face this particular problem of dowry deaths, where the deaths were occurring because of the demand of dowry that brides were facing, particularly newly married brides. But at that point of time, let us say that the scenario has certainly changed over the years. More and more women, and now living in a metro, I speak more for the metro women or the urban women. I do think that, and I'm not making out a case either for Atul or for Nikita, the complainant in the present case, but I would say that more and more women who are living in urban and metro cities do not really need the kind of protection that section 498A Indian Penal Code, the erstwhile penal code, that was giving to them. Because now what is happening is more and more a compatibility problem, compatibility issues which are there in young couples, particularly. And, and now once there's a breakdown of the matrimonial relationship between the parties, it's always that all hell breaks loose, and as they say, there's no greater fury than a woman scorned. So it may be for any reason whatsoever, but when there's a problem, women do come out with a vengeance, and, they have to go to the court. So now whatever sections are there in law, the lawyers will draft a particular complaint based upon those sections and bring the complaint around to meet, come within the parameters of that particular section of law. Whether it be dowry prohibition law, whether it be 498A, or whether it be the Domestic Violence Act, etc. So what I would like to say over here, that section 498A particularly, which has time and again been used, at one point it was being used in a proper manner, but now as a lawyer and with my experience at the bar now, almost 37 years, I would say that yes, I do agree that there is a rampant misuse, and girls who are otherwise economically strong, and advanced, educated, they have the protection of their families. They're not bichara women, they're not abla
Madam,
naris.
I got your argument. I got
Yes.
your argument, madam. Stay with me. Basically, you're saying that we need to distinguish, and the time has changed and the context has changed. But this particular suicide has sparked a debate. It's not restricted to social media. It has become a pan-India conversation. I think it became the most visited point of debate in newsrooms. I would say it was very heavily debated on social media also. It's very heavily talked also in context of the law and how it should be suited. Just to put it in context, let me just play out the bites of the victim's family, because in this case, this testimony of his own ordeal which came out has sparked this conversation. What do you need to do with this law? It's pretty much complex, but then the ultimate issue is it requires a debate, conversation in which the parliament needs to also play a central role. So let me play out the bites first, and then I'll go to Ajit and Brijesh.
मेरे बच्चा को इंसाफ दिलवा दीजिए, बस और कुछ नहीं चाहिए। मेरे बच्चा को इंसाफ दिला दीजिए, मेरे बच्चा को इंसाफ दिला दीजिए।
माँ जी, हुआ क्या था? आपके बेटा कुछ बोले थे आपको? बोल। आपके बेटा आपको कुछ बोले थे क्या? बताए थे सर?
कुछ नहीं बताया। हमसे 10 बजे तक बात किया, एक दिन पहले तक कुछ नहीं बताया।
कुछ नहीं बोल पाया
उसके साथ जो हुआ है ना, कानून व्यवस्था, ये अपने लॉ की व्यवस्था इतनी कैसा उसको भीतर से तोड़ दिया है।
फॉल्स केसेस लगाए जा रहे हैं इंडिया में। सिर्फ इस लॉ को यूज़ करके निर्भया केस के बाद लॉ को इस तरह से प्रेजेंट किया गया है, और उसी चीज़ का वो कानून जो है उसी चीज़ का मजाक उड़ाया, कानून में उसी चीज़ का मजाक उड़ाया जा रहा है। उसी चीज़ को का फ़ायदा उठा के मेन के ऊपर मतलब फॉल्स केसेस डाल के जितने तरह के सेक्शंस यूज़ किए जा सकते हैं यूज़ करके एक सेक्शंस को अगर खारिज कर दिया जाता है कोर्ट के द्वारा, उस सेक्शंस को बाद में फिर से रीअप्लाई करके फिर से वही ट्रायल चलते हैं, वही सारी चीज़ें चलती है। तो ये कानून का गंदा मजाक नहीं है क्या? मैं ये पूछना चाहता हूँ। सर, उसका ये मानना था कि मेरे पैसे कमाए हुए पे अगर मैं गलत हूँ तो किसी का हक होना चाहिए, अगर मैं गलत नहीं हूँ तो किसी का और का हक नहीं होना चाहिए। अगर उसने पैसे मेहनत से कमाए हैं, जॉब करके पैसे कमाए हैं, तो इस पे उसकी वाइफ का हक डिवोर्स के बाद आप इस तरह से एक्सटॉर्शन करके पैसे लेने का राइट उनका नहीं है। अगर आप जेन्युइनली अगर डिवोर्स में होता, जेन्युइनली केस होते सेटल, इवन इसमें तो उसने जज को भी इसमें बताया कि कैसे जज जो है उसे पैसे मांग के कह रही हैं कि 5 लाख रुपए आप दोगे हमें तो हम ये केस सेटल डाउन करेंगे, और नहीं तो आपके और आपके फैमिली को सबको हरास करेंगे। तो ये क्या न्याय पे बैठे हुए जो इतने बड़े पद पे जिसे हम अपेक्षा करते हैं कि हमें एक न्याय मिलेगा, वो अगर इस तरह से करप्ट हो जाएं तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि इस देश में कानून का कुछ हो सकता है।
Ajit, your take on the issue.
As our colleagues, both are lawyers, they have pointed out that 498 has been misused. Yet, if you look at the data, the same data that you cited, 6,450 dowry deaths has taken place last year itself. I mean, that's really a national shame. I think dowry deaths is something that only happens in this country. And it's really shocking. In fact, we gave the figure that there were 13,479 cases. And apparently the laws have brought down, even if marginally, 4.5% decline. So the laws have helped. At the same time, both our lawyers have pointed out that 498 has been misused. Now, this is a very tragic case, that of Atul Subhash. He writes a letter to the president where he talks about, the need for unbiased justice. No one can sort of disagree with that. The principle, the moral principle behind justice should be fairness, should be unbiased justice. And he hints at corruption of justice. In his letter, he points out how this Jaunpur judge, for example, had been asking for money. Then the lower officials had been asking for money. How he had to make 30 trips in a matter of a year or so. So all that shows that there is harassment. I have heard of a few cases here and there. I'm not an expert on the subject of family law, but it's obviously, if it is not working, if 498 is not working, at least let's say in the urban cases or in cases where, as our lawyer pointed out, where women are independent and at times as a vengeance, they go ahead and, go and bring out cases like murder, sexual misconduct, harassment, domestic violence, etc., etc. In this case, apparently 9 cases this guy was facing, right, Atul Subhash, from his wife. So maybe that it's time for a rebalance. Maybe this 498A could be changed, of course, with a lot of discussion, and just ensure that these cases of harassment that these men are facing, the husbands,
Ajit,
doesn't happen. But at the
Ajit,
same time,
it's a matter
at
of
the same time, I'm
Ajit,
pointing out that dowry.
I don't know what sort of how deterrence works in context of enforcement of law. There are 2 laws, and that were made one made in context of caste, and another made in the context of patriarchy. Though patriarchy operates through both men and women, so for dowry, it's just not men. Women are also, they participate in the entire process. Both were done in a context. SC/ST law to prevent cruelty against scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and dowry, the burning of women, harassment. So those 2 had social context. Brijesh, tell me, every life matters, but should a law be diluted today because this case has come up? If you look at the history, the law may have been misused by many people, but it has also ended up giving justice to many women as well, and prevented many women from dying also.
Well, Kartikeya, I completely agree with Rekha ji when she says that, this law was brought in when the social and cultural milieu of the society was completely different. There were so many cases, of women being burned to death, of women being very unfairly targeted. 1 week, 10 days later, they would be kicked out of their house. Their parents were made to subject to severe humiliation and death and so forth. And that is when this particular law was introduced. It was introduced with great welcome, and for a certain period of time, it actually helped restore the balance to a level. But Kartikeya, I would also like to add one more point, which is very, very crucial. Whenever you have a law which gives absolute power to one side, it is 100% prone to be misused. There are not 2 ways about it. When you have a law which says that if a woman goes and complains, you can arrest not only him, but his old mother, father, his brother, sibling, anybody who is living with him, without bail and without any investigation. And whenever the law puts the onus of the proof on the accused, then you are basically making a mockery of the system. Nobody is saying that that you should not provide women with the legal this, but you also have to understand, you cannot put this. This is exactly what is happening in the case of ED.
Deepika, I have a question for you. You have been dealing with these issues, men rights, for a pretty long time. Do you think that stigma, inability of men to speak, they are being harassed by a woman, is also a problem? In patriarchy, the men are supposed to be the dominant species. Do you think that is also a case, that the men don't come out because, one, no one would believe them. Second, it would become a stigma. Third, it would, affect their sense of what it means to be a man. Have you come across cases like this? Because in this particular case, the man committed suicide. He couldn't take it. But what's the big picture you have in context of men being on the other side?
Kartikeya, let me just share that it is not just Atul Subhash. The reason that this entire country is riling up and angry today on Atul Subhash's case is not coming from just Atul Subhash's case. Please understand that. I have several pages of suicide note written by men where they have died writing their plights on how they were how they were victims of false accusations and they were not heard at all. So this is not coming only from Atul's case. This country has been facing, there are lakhs in families who have been victims of false accusations under the Dowry Act and under various special provisions made for women. Yes, it is very difficult for men to come out, but let's please also understand they are stacked to the complete corner. You have not one, not two, not three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cases happening between a man and a woman over exactly the same dispute where the perpetrator is always the man, even if he is the victim. How much strength can a person have to face one litigation after another litigation where until he gives in to the money demand, until he gives in to the monetary demand, he is not set free? How much can a man? Yes, obviously there is a stigma for men to speak up, and we do not even have laws, Kartikeya. I really want to make and emphasize a very important point. You're talking about dowry deaths. Do we have any data on how many men are victims of domestic violence in this country? No, because there is no law. Do we have any data on how many men die or suicide or die unnatural deaths? No, because of this spousal violence. No. Do we have any data how many men are murdered by
Deepika,
their
are you
wives?
saying
No.
there are two things?
No
Deepika,
data for men
Deepika,
is
I'm asking
collected
you a
for us
question.
to even
Deepika,
draw a
I'm asking you a
comparison.
question.
We do
I
not have
understand,
any data for
Deepika,
men.
Deepika, I understand that the issue of domestic violence can be gender neutral. It can be made gender neutral.
Yes.
But do you think that dowry death, which had been happening in this country, the laws should be diluted? Wouldn't that embolden people in rural areas?
Kartikeya, we are talking about.
Wouldn't that embolden people in rural areas to go forward and again demand dowry?
No, Kartikeya, we are talking about addressing misuse of IPC 498A, which is not dowry death. It is the law on cruelty in the pretext of dowry. 498 is the law on which Supreme Court and High Court has repeatedly said that it is being misused. This is the law in which all the family members are implicated. Despite bringing reliefs on immediate arrest by the Supreme Court, just in the last 2 years, there have been at least 12 to 14 judgments where all the family members were implicated, and the courts once again said that can we just address this rampant misuse of this provision. And Kartikeya, why is this provision misused? Because this has become a tool to demand money. We are not controlling dowry deaths by 498A. We are just propagating a financial settlement and either claim of domestic violence where it could just be a matter of incompatibility, the couple not staying together for some or the other reason, but by default 498 and this package that Atul talks about is slapped on the man, and it keeps on coming. Domestic Violence Act 125 case, maintenance under at least 3 to 4 provisions. How much can a man take?
Okay.
So it's about addressing this imbalance in the laws, which is completely stacked on one side. Let us protect women for the injustice or suffering that happens to them. But let us not please allow them to weaponize the laws and use them as tools of extortion.
Okay, then let me take this. Okay, you stay with me, Deepika. Let me take this question to Rekha Agarwal. Madam, how can this balance be maintained? How can women be protected? How can women be protected and misuse be prevented? That's the third question.
So I think that first of all, an attempt can be made to make the laws gender neutral. First of all, the Domestic Violence Act of 2005, because in this particular case of Atul that we're discussing, he allegedly suffered domestic violence himself at the hands of his wife. So one start would be made by making this law gender neutral. And as far as Section 498 is concerned, which has got very, very far-reaching consequences on the entire family, that too, one can probably make it, the lawmakers have already tried to save the men from being harassed and their family members from being harassed by having that safeguard mechanism of a CAW cell, where the guidelines are there under Section 41 of CRPC that you cannot immediately register an FIR in such kind of cases, and you must make an attempt at a settlement first. So that should be made more effective. And if I think the word dowry itself, which is there in Section 498A, is a very loaded word. because where women suffer cruelty at the hands of their husbands or in-laws, allegedly, it may not always be in cases of dowry. It can be for many other reasons also. So the Dowry Prohibition Act, particularly in metro cities, I see that it is not being used so much as Section 498A. So I think that an attempt should be made to make an amendment to Section 498A, and probably if we take out the word dowry from that, then maybe that Section 498A can also now, which is now the erstwhile IPC, and now 85 and 87 of the BNS, it can also be made gender neutral. So I'm not at all advocating the case either of men or of women, husbands or wives. All are equal before law. But in the Indian context and social milieu, the social setup and cultural setup was admittedly against women at some point of time, where they faced so much of harassment at the hands of the husbands and in-laws for dowry. The greed for dowry was so much there. But now in the urban context, things have changed. And therefore, I think it is more in metro cities and urban areas where women are filing such kind of 498A cases. The actual sufferers, the downtrodden women, they don't even have access to law and justice. They don't have access to lawyers. How many people go to these Kanuni Sahayata Kendra and take the help of free legal aid which is available to women? Women are not even aware of that. So I think let us not get swayed by this particular case that has happened. It is really very unfortunate that Atul has taken his life in this manner at a young age of 34. I think he lost faith in the judicial system very, very soon. This was only the first court. We do have a high court and we do have a Supreme Court. And an educated man like him, I do. It's extremely sorry, but the legal system is there to protect. We're in a democratic country. So all these allegations, whether they are right or wrong, they're a matter of trial. The allegations of corruption, etc. But as far as the wife is concerned, yes, we haven't heard the other side of the story. I'm not saying that Nikita's allegations are true or false, but that time will tell.
Madam, the reason why today I decided to get into this subject was, I know it's a very sad case. I know at the age of, he was in his 30s and he committed suicide. But the issue isn't the larger architecture of the relationship between men and women. The laws that were made in 60s and 70s to prevent crime against women, to give them protection. But at that point of time, they were, I don't think the laws were gender neutral. They were, I think, gender specific. So, Ajit, coming to you, do you think that there is a possibility that there can be a political consensus to create a new framework for these laws? Because if you go by political impulse, after Nirbhaya, the laws were even toughened. They were hardened.
See, Kartike, it is impossible to fight this problem. It's almost like a gender war going on here. And if you hear how tragic the case was, and there are lakhs of such cases going on in the country, it's impossible to fight it simply through the judicial system, especially given the pressures on our judicial system. Our lawyer friend pointed out that, he got impatient. To be honest, most of us are impatient. In fact, anything that happens to us, we do not want to go to the courts, because we know, I know of friends who have entire career has been destroyed because they went to the court. So our court system is really, really outdated. I mean, cases go on for 30 years, 40 years, your whole lifetime, and still don't get justice. So I think it's important, as you pointed out, we need a political consensus. We need a social movement to fight this ugly, picture of dowry, whatever, harassment, in this case, all kinds of domestic violence. You simply cannot fight it simply with changes in the law. And the other problem is, you cannot have a differential system of law. After all, in the rural areas, I come from the Hindi heartland, in the villages in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, or wherever I move around during elections, I see dowry is such a big problem that families get indebted for their entire life. So obviously we cannot just keep on changing the law simply because some cases are, sort of not favoring men. Of course, the attempt should be to have a sort of unbiased law, The attempt should be to get fairness, justice as fairness. But how do you do it is a very difficult issue, and it has to be done only with the entire society getting involved, not merely changes in the legal system, I would argue.
Is men harassment a reality, Brijesh?
Oh, absolutely. And Karthikeya, I mean, I completely disagree with Rekha ji when he says that, she says that the gentleman concerned got impatient too soon. I mean, I can understand that, like, as a journalist, we go to people who are in power, so we know, why don't you approach them? Why don't you talk to them? She is a lawyer herself. But the point is that, if there are 10 cases slapped against you and you have to make, 20 appearances as per his suicide note from, Bangalore to Jaunpur court, and, when you are witnessing what he has described in his letter, the judge laughing at his misfortune and all. I mean, you can't blame, and, people are sensitive. It's not like everybody has that, the capacity or mental tenacity to take it to another level. People can feel bogged down. He felt bogged down, and it's a very unfortunate state of event. See, the problem is that in India, what we feel is that the law is the panacea to cure all evil. That is not the case. What about police? What about courts? There are instruments of justice. And, like in the Nirbhaya rape case also, when people said, oh, we will make a foolproof law which will deter people. Death sentences hasn't deterred ever anybody for not to carry out a particular, any kind of heinous crime per se. The fact is that, if you have law...
In fact, I'll just stop you and say, late Justice Leela Seth. Actually, Justice Leela Seth, because she was part of the Nirbhaya committee, headed by one of the retired Supreme Court judges then, she said this,
that is how it is.
The deterrence is not premised on making harder laws because there was a suggestion for a chemical
implementation.
Because there was a suggestion for a chemical castration. And late Justice Leela Seth had actually argued that it has to be a multi-pronged strategy.
Absolutely. See, the point is, what is your first point of contact when anything bad happens to you? You go to police. What is your experience? 99 times out of 10, people will come out and share horrible ordeals. I'm not saying that all policemen are corrupt or there's no faith in the system. Your second point of contact is the judiciary. Well, if you look at the kind of harassment he was meted out and the behavior of the judge in question, if you go by his suicide note, it was horrible. When you have your first and the second point of contact so viciously contaminated, then where is the faith in the system? So, and that is the reason why I have always believed that, instead of making law stronger, you should always make sure that the instruments of law are held accountable to a level where people will ensure effective justice. If you make a law which says Karthikeya is guilty and Brijesh Pandey is innocent, can you actually, imagine a situation where you will get justice by any chance? This is exactly 498A.
This debate can actually go on and on because yes, men harassment is a reality, but I would say my takeaway is that the misuse of Dowry Act should not be allowed. But the Act has protected women and it must stay. That is the big takeaway of our conversation. So thank you, Ajit, for joining me on this debate. Brijesh stays with me, and that's all on Point 1. On the other side of the break, we will discuss how Mohan Babu assaulted TV9 reporter who was just doing his job. So don't go away.